Hey guys, welcome to episode 53 of the Mutant XPerience podcast. With me on this episode is Grouflon, the
Hello.
developer behind the Lua training script, a script that I believe has done a tremendous job in keeping the Third Strike scene alive. And so we will definitely get to all that. But Remy, first and foremost, thank you for coming on to the podcast. I appreciate your time and your work and dedication. I know we're going to get into the Lua a little bit, but as someone who does use it, the care really shows.
Thanks.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I don't know anything about programming. But as someone who uses computers and programs,
Yeah.
you can tell when there is care.
Yeah. Thanks. I really appreciate it because, I do spend a lot of time sometimes, like, on really, really small details to have it just right as I want them. And I don't always achieve it because it's not possible, but and I really appreciate that you notice that,
Yeah,
I've attention to details.
Yeah, it definitely does shine through. But, before we get into all that, Grouflon, tell me a little bit about your childhood growing up in terms of playing video games.
I don't know how are the different, path to playing Third Strike and playing fighting games in general, but I have pretty much played video games since I was really, really, really small. I think my dad brought back a first computer when I was 3 years old. It was an old DOS thing without anything like Windows inside of it, and you had to type command lines to launch games. And our dad used to write which command lines we had to write to launch each game, and that's what we used to play Prince of Persia and stuff like that on it. So this is where I started from. So I pretty much always had computers around and video games around. But I think the funny thing is that I've never really played a lot of fighting games until recently. I played, as everyone, a lot of Street Fighter 2. Cause it was the game that everyone was playing at the time. But I was playing the crappy, Mega Drive version, where you had only 3 buttons, and you had to press start to switch between the kicks and the punches. And I played a lot of that, but then it didn't stroke me as some genre that I was really interested into. And then I played a lot of games and sometimes played fighting games, but I was just basically button mashing my way through the games. And it's only recently that a friend of mine, when Dragon Ball Fighters came out, told me, hey, we should play this game together. And I was like, yeah, okay. I didn't even read or watch Dragon Ball. I wasn't a Dragon Ball fan either. I was like, yeah, okay, why not? And I started the game with him. And it really caught me as something really, really super deep and super, super interesting. And I really got into the game and trying to understand, get better. I started even attending tournaments with my friend. And it's around that time, I think the game Dragon Fighters came out in 2018, I think, something like that. And maybe a year after, I had friends around me who played a bit of Third Strike on the 30th anniversary collection. And I started playing with them too. And that's where the game caught me, basically. So we played a lot with those 2 friends of the game and noticed that there were Third Strike communities in France, and we could go to events where people play Third Strike. And so we went to one. There's one that happens from time to time, France, called the Paris by Night, which is in Paris. And basically there are cabinets there and Supergun also. There's a lot of stations where you can play. And basically it's all night long. You arrive at 4 p.m. and you leave at 7 a.m. the next day. And there's a tournament and all the best players in France are there. And yeah, there was like, we were like a little bit blown away by the level of the people. Like basically we spent the whole night there, and I don't think I ever like won a game for the whole night. But that was really nice though. And yeah, I felt really like drawn to the game from that point. And that this was really a game that I wanted to play more. And at some point it became even, I didn't want it to play Dragon Ball Fighters very much anymore. And I wanted to play Third Strike. So, and at that point, yeah, I mostly played on 30th anniversary. And I tried to use the training mode to understand the game better. And I came from Dragon Ball Fighter, which has a pretty good training mode. And you can use a lot of its tools to understand the game better, understand what you're doing wrong and everything. And the training mode for 30th anniversary is really, really terrible. Like, you can't really do much with it except practicing your combos, but in terms of game knowledge, it's really, really tedious to use. And at some point, I got so frustrated about the training mode of 30th anniversary, and that I decided that I would prefer like spend my time doing something better than just using it and losing my time, trying to grab pieces of knowledge from it.
So you get into fighting games through Dragon Ball Fighters.
Yeah.
What was it about that game or the genre? Because you had mentioned that prior to that you played video games, but not really too many fighting games. And so what was it about DBZ, you think, that drew you into the genre?
I think it's because the game is really well designed in terms of learning curve, I think. Now that I think about it, it's a bit daunting at first because you play 3 characters. So this is a bit overwhelming at first. But there's a lot of work put into having common mechanics through all the characters, all the game, meaning that you can pretty much like apply some of the thing you know to everything in the game, and there's a clarity to this game that a lot of other games don't have, because the phases of the game are, I think, even at very, very high level, pretty clear. And it's really a game that revolves around when is it your turn and when is it not your turn, which is a very, like, I think, staple of fighting games. But it's more blurry in a lot of fighting games. Like, the turns alternate, like, pretty fast, and there's way to steal turns, especially in Third Strike. And Dragon Fighter, the fact that there are very, very long strings, very, very long combos, it's really, really easier, I think, than in other games to start to understand what fighting games are about and what the different things do, basically. I think that's one of the things, like, I think I always knew what I had to work to get better when I play this game. And I think that's, what caught me.
Yeah, you used the word clarity.
Yeah.
And I really like that word. With a game like Third Strike, this may sound a bit reductionist, but it is sort of like chess. When you talk about your turn, my turn, when is it your turn, when is it my turn, what can I do with my turn? And like you were talking about in Third Strike, you can quote unquote heel turns. So when you talk about Third Strike, it seems as though, or in the fighting game genre in general, you seem to be drawn to that aspect of chess. Is that like an interest in like game theory or things like that, you think? Or
Yeah, I've a pretty big interest in game theory for sure. And I think what makes that I'm now drawn into fighting game, and I think I'll play this kind of games like all my life, and I probably play Surf Strife all my life, is that I see it as a way, I mean, at some points, it always feels like the game is disappearing and you're just having a conversation with your opponent. And this is something that I really like about it. Like the things that you can communicate and express to one another through the game and through the limits of the game. And this is what differentiates also the different games, because you say different things with different games. And I like what you basically tell with Surf Strike. I don't know if it makes sense.
I'm trying to understand it, but it definitely do. I definitely do start to, get that aspect of Third Strike. And it's a really interesting way of thinking about it, because personally for me, I've always been more of an emotional player.
Yeah.
And as I have gotten older, I've started to be more mindful of the technical aspects of playing the game. And that is in large part due, or Lua, which again, talk about eventually. But I still just like that word that you use, clarity of purpose. Like you were saying, like in Third Strike, whether you won or lost, and whether you look at it on a micro level, meaning like you'd even look at it with every interaction. Did you win or lose this interaction, or did you win or lose the game or the round? We're talking about how in Third Strike, there's like a clear path to like overcoming that, right? Or addressing that issue at least. Not to say, I don't want to use the word overcome, because then it sort of betrays what Third Strike is, what makes Third Strike special, right? Because there's always almost like an answer to.
Yeah, I think that's it. There's the simplicity to Third Strike. Like it doesn't take much time to like explain what you can do in Third Strike. But the things articulate in a way that make it so like deep, and it's like infinite level of depth. And that's what I think I mean by it makes you have like conversations with the opponents, because at some point it's not about what the game allows you to do, it's about what each other do with what the game allows. And you can always like have this like step in advance. And I talked with someone in an event who told me that something that I think is very true is that it's not Third Strike is a game about matchup for sure, character to character, but it's even more a game of matchup, player against player, which I find very true. There's a lot of different play styles in Third Strike for the same character, and there are a lot of valid play styles for the same character. And there's a lot of players that you can recognize just by looking at their matches. And this is something I really like, and I think makes the game special. Yeah.
That really is fascinating. It's almost like the simplicity of the game allows for that diversity of playstyle.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so.
Allows for that freedom.
And it's something, it's maybe a bit in depth in game theory, but I was having this conversation with a friend who's a game designer about this, and we talked about Magic the Gathering also, because he's a big player of Magic the Gathering. And I was making this parallel where some of those games were not as designed as the games we do now, which are more like streamlined. For instance, when you take Dragon Fighter, what I told at the beginning is like, there's a lot of things that are normalized between characters to help like get a grasp of the game faster, which is not the case in Surfstrike. For instance, in Surfstrike, every character has different wake-up timings, has different tech techniques, have different a lot of things, and even some characters have different frame data when they block. For instance, Ryu or Chun-Li or Q, and all the subtleties. It's not, I don't believe, I'm not in the mind of the people who created Surfstrike, but they don't strike me as something that is really, really that much intentional. And I think this, like, kind of not super thought thing is also what brings, like, expressivity in a way. And I think it's the same thing in Magic the Gathering. They are more, like, streamlined design of card games now. But all the little details that may make the game feel a bit old are also what makes it very, very special.
You were talking about the getting into the mind of the game designers. Have you ever read the transcripts of the interviews with the game developers of Third Strike? They're on the web. They're online. They've been translated into English.
Yeah, I think I did. I've read some articles about the developers, and it's been a long time, so I don't remember that much, but it seems to me that it talked a lot about also the environments, the industry at the time, and the arcade markets, and how it was pretty much the environments that had a lot of influence in the game design, in the game like making at least, where it was this phase where everyone was switching to 3D, and there was this team that wanted to make the best 2D fighter ever, but everyone was telling them, yeah, it's kind of over, you need to switch, and they were still making this game.
Yeah, because I only ask because when you read those transcripts, again, I know zilch about programming. So we have to remember that when these developers are giving these interviews, these are to a general audience. These are for magazines. And so they are not going to necessarily talk about some of the intricacies of the game design that maybe someone like you would be familiar with. But I think that would be really cool if maybe someone were to maybe find a way to approach the devs and have like a different conversation about Third Strike, maybe more on the technical level. That would be kind of interesting.
Yeah, that would be super interesting. If I ever go to Japan and come across Sugiyama, maybe we can have a conversation about it.
Because, like I was saying in those interviews, they just make references to design choices, but they never really go into detail about sort of the technical aspects. All they really talk about is their desire to, quote unquote, perfect this Street Fighter 3 system, parry system. But as far as the nuts and bolts, like how did they do that? That would be really interesting. Even for someone like me who knows nothing about programming, I would definitely something like that.
Yeah, I would too, definitely.
So let's, talk a little bit about your inspirations for the Lua. You have already had talked about how when you first started getting into Third Strike, it was mostly through 30th. And so I just kind of wanted to talk about your inspirations for creating it. I mean, this is quite an undertaking. Like, what sort of compelled you to do this?
Yeah, so there's a lot of things. I think as a lot of things in this story, like the Third Strike, what happened to Third Strike since a few years, it's maybe like a bit of lack of time when things align, you know. But I think as far as I'm concerned, I've been like, I'm really like into games since, as I said, since I'm a child. And so I have a lot of love for old games and how I'm really interested in how old games are made also. And we won't go into too much details about it, but I'm a game programmer as a trade, that I also do video games on my like main job. But I've started this job like not very long ago. There's maybe 7 years that I work in that industry, and I'm a little bit always wondering how it was like 20 years ago, and what does the job look like at the time, and how long was it to make a game? How do you do it basically? And it feels like it was far less organized than how it is now. And so I always had this interest for old machines and old games. And I've, tried to develop on some old systems. Like I've done a bit of development on the Game Boy, for instance, and to understand how it worked. And this game, I don't know, I was like, yeah, it's like a big game. It's not a huge game, and it's probably feasible in some way to understand how it works just from nothing. And I was like, interested in the idea of reverse engineering. So basically you have the game and you, from it and from tools that you have, try to understand how the game works and how it's made and what's inside of it. And I don't know, there was like, it felt like I had this idea in the back of my mind to see, how could you like reverse engineer a game? And there was this thing that, I was frustrated into not having this training mode, and felt like I could use like this interest and this idea together to try to make something. So it really came out of this, basically. And so I looked a bit around to see what people maybe had already tried for Third Strike. And there was a few tries, and there was even a training mode already existing by Crystal Cube, who is also someone who has done I think a very big lot for Third Strike. He's always like pushing the understanding of the game. He's more into like tool assisted stuff now. But he, I think, laid the base for training modes and maybe just scripts on FB Neo as we know them now. But I didn't start it from his script. I started from someone who did like a weird implementation of another software that you run on top of the emulator, and which accesses the memory of the emulator, find the place where the game memory fits inside the emulator's memory, and then reads and writes stuff inside of it. And I tried to do something like that, and discovered that it was doable technically, and which was like super interesting, and that was what I was a bit like looking for. And I tried to fiddle a bit with that idea, see what we could do, and I finally hit a wall where it was really super difficult to synchronize an external program with the rate of update of the game, and you couldn't like update the thing every frame and catch things that happen very, very quickly. So I kind of figured out that it was not feasible using this method, but it wasn't for nothing though, because this first version of the training mode, I made from it a tool to analyze the game memory and search inside the game memory, like inspect it, and I added like functionalities to, for instance, find very easily what has changed between 2 frames in the memory, to see, for instance, when you are in neutral and you hit a button, and then you can observe the differences in memories between those 2 states, and then try to see if those changes are relevant, what do they mean, etc. And that was basically my whole process into understanding the memory. And I only focused on that in the end. I did, because, you know, in a game, there's the code, which is the thing that runs in the machine processor. And there's the memory. The memory has all the state of the game, and the code has all the logic of the game. And I didn't touch anything about the code, just the memory. So it was just about reading the state of the game and changing the state of the game to do certain things that I use for training mode, for instance, to have infinite life, infinite time, stuff like that. Okay. And so basically this first version of the tool became my main tool to understand the game enough to then do a Lua script that could do the things that I wanted. And this Lua script was heavily based at first on the Crystal Cube script from, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago.
Is this something that you started, you know, from day one by yourself and then brought on other collaborators, or was this something that you sought out collaborators first and then started the project? How did that go about?
Yeah, so it mostly started by myself. And I think it probably has been the case I started working on that on July 2019, I think. And I think I worked on it just by myself without telling anyone, maybe for 1.5 years. Because it kind of, depending on the period of the development, the day-to-day work, if we can call that day-to-day, because it was a side project for me as well. So it was mostly like on the evening, on the weekends, when I had the will to work on it, basically. And it was different when I started and how it is now, for instance. When I started, basically, I had a lot of open questions about whether what I wanted to do was feasible or not. And this was what was occupying a lot of my work. There were things that that I know I wanted, but I was pretty sure that I could achieve them. Like recording, for instance. It didn't seem very difficult to do. You just had to do it. But there was one feature that I liked very much in Dragon Fighter's training mode, is the fact that you could configure counterattacks, like configure very easily something that the opponent should do on the first frame. It is available after hit a block stun, and I really like that feature because it allowed you to understand frame data, but not from the numbers, from the actual situation in the game. And so you could just do a move and then do another move and program the opponent to do the same move. And you could see if you were finished, the opponent was finished. And this was a very, very useful way to understand the game hands-on. And I really liked that. And so that was basically what I wanted to have. But for that, you needed a lot of things, actually, and you needed the dummy to be able to block, which was probably the most difficult thing to do. So probably spent 1 year having this right. It's not, I think it will never be right, like be able to block every move of the game in any situation, because there are some things that are very difficult to do, but in the state it's in right now, I think it's already pretty good, and it blocks most of the things, and then allow you to, trigger these reversal things after. So probably the first year was just about getting the auto blocking right. And so the problematic was that, as I said, I do not modify the game code. So I cannot like insert things to say you should have been hit, but instead of being hit, you block. I cannot do that. What I have access to is just read the game state, know what is happening, and then using the inputs as a player would do to block at the right time. So this is a lot of interaction to do this. And I think if the game developers would have made a training mode, they wouldn't have done it that way because they would have access to the code and be able to make special cases just for the training mode, which was not available to me. But this is a good thing in a way, because this guarantees that if the training mode can do it, you're guaranteed that there is no difference with the game, because the training mode does the exact same things that you would do with your stick and buttons, which is great, I think. The exception made is that I can simulate charges. So kind of cheat on charges and give you instant charge, basically. That's the only thing that the training mode does that a normal user will not be able to do. But I'm drifting. But so basically, yeah, the first year was finding the right way to do that. And I tried really a lot of different methods to be able to achieve that. And I finally find a way to do it. But there was this time where then I wanted to be able to do the recording, and it was the time when it was Fightgate 1, which was using Final Burn Alpha, I think. And there wasn't even the Lua in Fightgate. You had to download another version of the emulator of Final Burn Alpha, which has the Lua support, so you could run the script with it. And there was a bug in the emulator that in the input management, which made the character swapping thing really, really complicated. Like to be able to control player 2 with player 1 inputs, it was nearly impossible. And I spent like really a big chunk of time trying to make it work. And I even contacted the people from the emulator to see if I could fix the bugs that there was.
On a sort of related note, do you know Jotego?
Don't think so.
He is someone in the retro community that I believe is the person behind Mr. FPGA. And so what he does is he emulates on a hardware level.
Yeah, I heard of this.
Yeah, and so basically, Jotego is he has a CPS3 board, and so because you were talking about your interest in doing this, and part of it was reverse engineering a game.
Yeah,
and you're talking about it on a software level, but obviously it's related to sort of what Jotego is doing with the FPGA, trying to emulate it on a hardware level. And so I don't really know exactly where I'm going with this thread, but it seems like that your paths may cross at some point.
Yeah, it's totally complementary, I think. And it's I think good that these things happen now also, because we could indeed like cross path and discuss about it. But when I just started the thing, I had this feeling that really at this point, there wasn't a lot of people like trying to get into that anymore. And you had like relics of old projects like the Crystal Cube training mode. There's this ROM, like you probably know about the Fort Strike ROM, which is a modification of the game. And to make that, people must have had a very extended knowledge of the game code and memory. And there's no track of that. It's just the ROM and all the work they probably have done to make the mode. I don't know how to access it. Like I didn't find any information about it. And yeah, so I don't know where I'm going also with that, but yeah, it's good that there's a emulation right now, because maybe the different works that people do will cross and maybe like give birth to new things. Yeah.
Who were some of the players that sort of, started, noticing your project, or did you reach out to players, or what was, before the release, or what was that like there?
Yeah, before the release, not really. Like, I showed it to friends of mine, but who are not like really top players. And basically I released it maybe I probably talked a bit about it there's a French Surfstrike Discord server where basically everyone who plays Surfstrike in France is. And it's probably where I outed the first version of it. And so I started to have feedback about it. But I didn't finally in fact get a lot of feedback at that moment. People were just like, wow, this is so great. Like, no one like was criticizing the thing or like giving ideas, but everyone was like, this is already just great to have this. So, but shortly after I decided to make a Discord just for it. So people who are interested in the development of it can join, and so I can have conversation with people who use it. Because as I said, I wanted the thing to be for newcomers and for very advanced player. And I'm not a very advanced player. So I was really interested in what someone who plays the game for 20 years now needs as a training tool. And so a lot of people were interested in that and came to the Discord. And even some of them were programmers and helped develop features, which was, and is still very nice of them. And maybe one of the players who helped a lot with very fine things was Shoutouts, that you probably know, who's a very good Yun player. And he asked a lot of very fine things, which was very, very valuable, because I think I would not have been able to do the thing as much in details without him telling me, okay, this is good, but it would be nicer if it was that way. And we had a lot of back and forth on some features, which was very, very valuable. And a lot of other people done that, but I remember Shodokan because we had a lot of conversation at one point about, yeah. So I didn't even how Ganajin worked, basically, before talking with Shodokan. Like, I thought it was like a clone that applied multiple hits to every move, and it's not like that. It just changes frame data of the moves. So yeah, and one of the funny thing about doing this whole thing is that it brought my knowledge of the game very, very tremendously, on every character, because I had to test things on every character. And so yeah.
Before we talk more about the Lua, specifically the impact that the Lua has on the Third Strike scene, which I think is tremendous. I want to talk about, just kind of you as a player, because you enter tournaments, of course. What are some of the things that you sort of, aspire or have any kind of goals? Because I think with a game like Third Strike, everyone has a journey.
Yeah.
And that journey can go at whatever pace it takes you. So, just kind of, you had mentioned you enter tournaments.
Yeah.
Why do you enter tournaments? Why do you compete? What is it about a Third Strike tournaments that draw you as a competitor?
As a competitor, I think it's to just, I think I attend tournaments because it's a very specific time to be playing a tournament match. makes you feel things that you do not feel otherwise when you play casuals. There's this moment where it's just that game that you have to win. And if you don't win it, it's over, basically, which creates a very specific feeling, which I find very, very interesting. And I can see, like, how people play differently in casuals and tournaments. And this is not something that I've approached very much in my life. I wasn't a very competitive person. I didn't do any sports or competitive sports or anything. So this is fairly new to me, and I kind of like how you can explore those feelings through a game, so without consequences. And I especially like that, Third Strike is just people who still play Third Strike are people who love the game and just want to, like, there's no like money involved or anything, like very few at least. I don't think people are here for that. Which make the whole thing, like, I don't know, you just know that people are after something else than just, benefits that they will take from winning. And so I think one of the things that brought me to fighting games is, as I said, I see it as a conversation with the opponents, and it almost has this, feel playing fighting games and improving and acknowledging your weaknesses, overcoming them, understanding what you can do, what you can't do, what you don't want to do. Almost feels like, a therapy in some ways. Like, you really have to reflect on yourself to sometimes overcome the things that you're stuck into. You have, I'm pretty sure you've experienced that, and everyone in the fighting games community have experienced that. A moment where you feel stuck about something, like, say, a situation that you don't know how to overcome. And finding what you have to change in you to be able to handle that is, something that interests me a lot. And so this is in the, like, metaphysics side, maybe, but there also is this thing, which is one of the reasons why I made the training mode also, is that, I don't know how it is in the US, but in France, the Third Strike community is a very small community. It's a few hundreds of people throughout the whole country. So this is a very scarce community. You have a bit of concentrated points in, like, maybe 4 cities in France, Milan, in Paris, in Lyon, and maybe a bit in Marseille. But if you're not in those cities, there's no scene, basically, at all. And so going to tournaments is also a way to engage with the community and to meet people and improve. And I think there's a whole topic in that, into when you want to, like, the whole question about how you get into the game is really a question that interests me. And because it was difficult for me to get into the game, I knew I wanted to go, to invest myself in this game, but it wasn't easy because it was hard to find good tools to engage with the community. As I was just by myself in my city, I started to play with a friend in my city, but he stopped very quickly. So I don't know anyone playing Third Strike around me unless I take a train for 2 hours, basically. So
play Grouflon, please. If any of you are we're not gonna message this man, please.
But
He's looking for people to play Third Strike with.
But I don't know if it's probably the same thing, because it's an even bigger country, the US, so there's probably places where there's no Third Strike players around you, and there's no really what you can call a local scene.
It definitely is a niche scene.
Yeah.
We'll talk about newer players in a second, but I want to kind of flip the script a little bit and talk about the impact of the Lua on older players. We all are still going through a global pandemic.
Yes.
COVID-19. And many of us had the privilege and the luxury to be able to stay at home and have time on our hands. Many of us did not. But for those of us who were fortunate enough to have that time, this was definitely a time, personally for me as a Third Strike player, to, like I was alluding to earlier, really like learn the game, like how the game actually works. Which is like, okay, Mutant, like you waited 20 years to, right? Like, but again, everyone has their own journey. Not to say that I didn't know any like technical aspects of the game ever, right? Like, that's not to say that, but just coming from my experience, like the experience of things that I know now instinctually, because I've been playing the game forever.
Yeah.
And then now being able to use the Lua and then see, I guess, the science behind it, and to be able to kind of confirm what I already instinctually know about certain interactions and situations. That experience has been really rewarding in terms of, making me want to continue to play the game and explore the game and explore my character. The prime example is the Necro set play, drill set play videos. My obvious inspiration was Sugiyama, who debuted that in America at the Red Bull against Frankie BFG. And so basically it's a technique where Sugiyama on a hard knockdown, or really any knockdown, it doesn't really matter, right? If it's a hard knockdown, any knockdown, right? Depending on the timing of the drill, the first hit will cross up, followed by the second hit, which will, not cross up. So during COVID, I started this, interestingly enough, because you were talking about 30th. I also share similar opinions about the training mode for Anniversary Collection. So when I decided, okay, I'm gonna take this time to like really develop this drill set play, and just kind of lab it, and anyone who knows me as a player, knows that I don't lab. I don't lab. I do not lab. I don't, Grouflon. I don't. I just don't. I don't. Yeah. But, it was, I guess, like you were saying, kind of, sort of the timing of it. And I was able to, explore those set play, the mechanics of the Necro drill. There was a video that the Necro Compendium YouTube, which got taken down, by the way, by copyright strikes on YouTube. Talk about that maybe at another podcast or whatever. That broke down the drills. Also, I believe a player from Europe, not really sure, but and so when I started exploring the mechanics of the drill, I did it on OE training mode. Because that was the training mode that I was most familiar with as far as training modes. Like you were saying before, training modes had existed prior to OE, but I was not all that computer savvy. At least I was not as computer savvy as I am now, which I still am not that computer savvy. But and so the training mode that I have the most familiarity with is OE. And just from kind of a player perspective, OE was great. I like that training mode, especially like, the recording feature and the replay feature, because what it allowed me to do was, record certain setups. Like basically the way that I would lab those Necro drill setups is and I still do this to this day with the Lua, I record the set play, right? And then, I cycle through what my opponent can do as far as their options. That's sort of from a player perspective. That's how I use the Lua. And so I started with OE because it had the record replay feature. And then I recorded just, over 100 videos on OE. And now I want to basically re-record them using your Lua as scripts. And so just as far as kind of like the impact of the Lua, I know you want, definitely the focus is a lot of times on the newer players, but the impact on the older players, keeping us excited about the game and having a tool that will allow us to push our understanding of the game even further is really great, and again, just kind of that unique experience. Well, unique in the sense of, in terms of, other older players, but like just that experience of playing the game and knowing things instinctually. Like when I watch a game of Third Strike, it's like when I see something, I'll already know right away if it works or not. I may not be able to verbally explain it, but I see it. But now with the Lua, being able to kind of understand the why is a really great experience.
Yeah. That's a great thing. And I think that's one of the reasons I made it too, also to maybe allow people to go even further in what the game has to propose. And also to give more people access to those really higher levels of things. Because, you have to, like, experiment. And you get to this point where just saying it maybe is not enough. You have to, like, make it yours, basically, and then you have to have a tool to do that.
Yeah, I know we were talking a little bit about the interviews by the game developers. One of the excerpts from one of the interviews that always stand out in my mind is that developers were talking a lot about what type of audience they were catering to, right? And it seems as though the idea was that the developers were really trying to focus on the hardcore. They in the translation it was called hardcore players.
Okay.
And like when I first read that interview, I thought hardcore players. Oh, fighting game players, right? But from my own experience, is I grew up during that time when the Street Fighter 3 series came out. I was in my teens. I was living in Southern California, one of the hotbeds of the 90s arcade scene. And so I experienced sort of firsthand the the popularity or lack thereof of the Street Fighter 3 series. And so when I read the interview and it referenced quote unquote hardcore players, and I initially thought, oh, fighting game players. But then that didn't necessarily vibe with what I was actually seeing growing up, which is Street Fighter 3 was really not all that popular here in America. It just, the numbers just definitely bear that out. And just kind of from the eye test and just from what I experienced growing up, Street Fighter 3 did not seem all that popular. If anything, the Zero series or the Alpha series was I saw a lot more of, and then SNK was getting their foothold in that arena. And so I was like, who are these programmers referring to by hardcore players? And then I remember they were talking about testing the game. And maybe you can, comment on this, Grouflon, because one of the things I read in the interview was that they tested the game for a month. And they had 2 test sites, one in Japan, one in America, and they tested it for a month. And just sort of in passing, one of the interviewers was like, they had mentioned, Third Strike had a relatively long testing period. And then the developers were like, yeah, you know, we tested it for nearly a month. And I was like, well, hold on. Like, a month is a long time to test Counter-Strike back in the day? Because I know earlier in the podcast you were talking about your interest in how older games were developed. And so, like, I was like,
this tells a lot of things.
That sounds an awful, like, a short period. I mean, again, I'm not a programmer, but, like, like Capcom considered a month-long test to be a long period of time to test a game.
Yeah.
You know, that's very interesting. And in that story, you know, the interviewers were mentioning that there were a lot of second impact players, a lot of 2i players. And so what I took from that was, you know, when the developers were talking about the hardcore players, like maybe they weren't necessarily talking about just fighting game players in general. Yeah. They were talking literally about players who have played new gen and then who have played 2i, right? Yeah. Like those players who have already committed or have seen the promise of the parry system or the parry mechanic. Because they say in the interviews, they always say they were trying to perfect the parry system, whatever that meant, right? And so, like, to me, when they say hardcore players, I think they literally mean, like, players, Street Fighter 3 players.
Yeah, I think that's probably a change that for us as players, that they saw it that way. Because they could, it's really interesting what you're saying, because it feels like they saw that even though their audience was quite small, they could keep this audience, and so they aimed their work at making this audience really happy with the game. But they could have seen it like, okay, the audience is not large enough, so we have to change things and not perfect them. And this is really interesting, and the game would have been completely different if they hadn't made that choice. It probably wasn't very beneficial for them financially, I think, but still was a great choice for the player, I guess.
Yeah, because it's like, this is a team that has sort of worked on these titles. And so it's, you know, for them to go, okay, you know, because they do talk about wanting to, like, make it accessible, but to newer players, but that was, you know, they were in reference to character choices, right? Mm-hmm. Like, for instance, they were talking about how, they included Chun-Li because they wanted to have a character that was familiar to, you know, more audiences. But Chun-Li to this day in the Third Strike iteration, plays nothing like any of the other Chun-Li iterations. Yeah. You know, when you think about all the way from World Warrior, even to the Chun-Li in the Alpha series, like even you could argue in the Street Fighter 4 series, there's this Chun template, right? Like, she just seems like a very similar character in those games, except in Third Strike. Yeah. You know, and maybe SVC Chaos or something. but because I think SVC Chaos Chun was modeled more towards, like, the Third Strike Chun. I
haven't played it, I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, it's a wild game. It's cool, though. It's a wild game, though. Just to see Capcom characters drawn in that KOF style, it's a wild game. But, so it's like the developers were like, you know, when we spent all this time and, like, looking at the landscape, right? Like, what would be the, like you were saying, the transition from 2D sprites to 3D sprites? And I'm only speculating, but it's like, you know, like, even if they did try to, like, I guess it was like, maybe there was a decision between, like, compromising, like, was it worth it to compromise their vision, right?
Yeah.
At that point.
And I also think that Third Strike was born in a very strange place.
Yeah.
Because I also, like, when you think about it, it doesn't make a lot of sense for Capcom to, like, have done so many iterations of the game if it wasn't selling that much. But I think it also was because they wanted to use their boards, basically. They just had released this CPS3 board where there was not many games on it. And I think they just put money on the game and continue to put money on the game just because I think they expected their board to last longer, maybe like to be as used as the CPS2 and to have as many games, but it didn't, but I think they saw it as they develop their teams and their think about the board, also the hardware. And I think it plays a role into what Third Strike is also.
You know, maybe the appeal of Third Strike, like you said, going back to the beginning of the podcast, is that clarity. You know, that sense of clarity and simplicity. And, you know, perhaps that's what, you know, is the appeal of Third Strike. And so, you know, again, obviously the community around the game and how that develops is important. But I think a lot of times, you know, we need to remember it's how special the game is. And that's one of the things, you know, that I think, you know, your Lua script does. It allows us, now we have a tool that allows us to see just how rich and complex and, like you said, infinitely interesting this game could be, you know? And so, you know, that's definitely kind of the great thing about the Lua as well. And, you know, let's talk about some of the newer players. Like, again, we were talking about the pandemic. A lot of people are forced, you know, to stay in their homes. And so that coincided with the rise of Fightcade. Now Fightcade is, you know, definitely super popular. Definitely the platform that most Third Strike players play online now. You're heavily integrated with the Lua script, you know, sort of, you know, involved in terms of, you know, just like when I think about Fightcade, just from a player standpoint or from consumer standpoint, it's like I see Fightcade, I can't like think about it, you know, outside of the Lua, right? Like these are two tools. Like when I think about anyone that wants to get into the scene, right? The two things I would tell them to download is A, Fightcade, and B, the Lua, right? You know, and whatever ROM or Third Strike ROM or whatever, right? You know, but like those are the two things that you would download. And so
there's a lot of other training modes for the games. Also, there's a lot of people doing that for the game, which is great.
And so, in terms of, you know, the Lua, what are your feelings about the reactions to the Lua from the players? I know you had talked a little bit about how helpful some players have been, particularly Shoutouts, in providing you with, you know, feedback.
The reaction has been, overwhelmingly positive, really. Like, everyone is really super happy with it, and everyone prays for it. Like, I couldn't be more thankful than I am to the support of the community, to the training mod. And I think they need praise too, because, what you said about the thing being, like, you can feel the care of it is also because I have a community of people, using it and testing it and making feedback on the Discord and everything. And it means that every time we add a feature in the training mode, we have a lot of people testing it and giving us feedback about what works, what doesn't work. And so we can really, like, iterate on the things, and, like, really having a community is a testing capacity of the training mode that I couldn't do myself, basically. So it's really great that people are invested in it. And there are even if people, there's someone, for instance, because, you know, the blocking system works about having to pre-record frame data on the game. So there's a database of frame data and hitboxes data that are in the files that you download with the emulator, with the training mode. And there's a debug mode where you can record those, so the mod knows when to block things. And there's someone who recorded every frame data for Third Strike.
Wow.
So I added them it's this person's work. Basically, I didn't do anything.
Yeah, I haven't dabbled in Force Strike yet. I have
The
heard
training
of
mode works for it, so if you want to try.
I have heard of interesting things about Force Strike. I may I may want to dabble into it.
Yeah, it also helps like other communities. I'm not that interested in Force Strike. I don't think I will really play it like seriously, but I'm pretty happy that people like makes use of the tool to try to build their own community around the game they like. And if they like Force Strike, that's
And one sort of specific thing that I wanted to applaud you for with regards to the Lua are the addition of the hitboxes and the spacing. That is definitely very next level. Because it literally changes the way. It could literally change the way a player plays the game, in the sense where now like for instance. One of the things one of the moves that I like to use, as a Necro main is Snake Fang, is the command grab, Necro's command grab, which you can blockable low. But now that we have the Lua and we have the hitboxes displayed, now players can know, visually, okay, like I don't have to be too far away. Right?
Yeah.
I can have the actual arm visually touch me, and I know it's not going to reach me. Right?
Yeah.
Just like little things like that, things that you would need to know through experience, through play. Now that's just something that's readily identifiable with something like the Lua.
Yeah, and that's funny. To like, you asked way before in the interview about what's the workflow working on the Lua script was, and right now, since everything is mostly working, there's still bugs, but everything's mostly there. Now it's more a matter of when there's something missing when I train, I can just like add it, and the distance thing is basically really comes down from me coming back from an event. I play Hugo as a main, and really, really struggling a lot with the Chun-Li matchup, which is really about spacing, command grab spacing, and down MK spacing, stuff like that. And I was like, I don't know, like, how can you like rationalize the distances? And I was like, I need like a numeric value basically, and I want to know like what's the distances and to be able to have a number and to. So then when I do like, a knockdown, I know if I'm at the right distance or not just by looking at the numbers. And so I just came back from the event. I was like, okay, I'm going to do that because I need it. and I just did it. And so it's basically this. Now the process of adding features is much more fluid than it was before. Because just have to think about it and do it.
No, that's really cool because like, again, everyone has our own third strike journey. But it's just really cool that someone like yourself not only plays the game, but then has the knowledge and the skills to then break the game down that way, right? Like you play the game and then you were like, man, I was struggling with the spacing. Like for me, I would just go into training mode and just, try to figure out what spacing is. Instead, you create a script that gives you a numerical value of how far you exactly are, And so that's really cool. And like you getting stronger will only make the Lua stronger when you think about it almost, right? So play this man, okay? Anyone that is listening to this podcast, please play Grouflon, okay?
Yeah, because one of the downside about doing this is that I probably spend much more time working on the script than training, really.
Yeah.
So I do not improve that much, but
Yes.
There's a way of, I think there's probably some part of me who procrastinate training by working on the training mode.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think that's something that's very common, but we won't get too much into that. But definitely play Grouflon, because the more you play him, the better Lua gets. Right? It's like it's almost like I'm trying to think, like it's like you're feeding into the into the hive mind of the Lua. It's just kind of like in Batman Forever. I don't know if you ever seen that movie, Batman Forever, with Jim Carrey and
a long time ago.
And then the Riddler, he has the device on his head, and it's just sucking brainwaves into the Riddler, making him smarter. That's what Grouflon is. If you play Grouflon, he gets more data, which thereby makes the Lua script better, which there in turn makes everyone stronger. So this is the tech. This is what we need to do as a scene. Play Grouflon. Just play Grouflon. Right? Because that was kind of my next question. Grouflon. I know you're not on. As someone who does podcasts, I try to do my research. Whether you have any, social media or anything like that. You don't. You just have kind of your dev page. Because my next question is, how can members of the Third Strike scene help continue to develop this Lua? Because the thing that excites me about the Lua Grouflon is that, again, like you were talking about, the infinite possibilities. The more we play the game, then the more the Lua maybe evolves or develops, which is really cool. Maybe we get to the point where the Lua just does everything that we discover, who knows? But like, how can players in the scene, or how can anyone in the scene, sort of help the Lua script for Third Strike, the training mode?
Really simply, just joining the Discord and giving your feedback is already a lot. Like your ideas, basically. A lot of people have a lot of great ideas to put into the training mode. And if you are interested in developing yourself, the training mode is open source completely. And if people propose modifications on this or that or new features, I usually take a look at them and try to integrate them as much as possible. And there's this thing, the special training things. Most of them has been done by other people than me. The 100 legs training for Chun-Li, or the charge training for all the Urian nation, basically. This has been done by people from the community. So this is what helps the most, I think. And
And are you not to go back to the player side of things? Are you part of any Hugo Discords at all, or are you?
I'm not.
Okay, so again, anyone listening to this, all the Hugo mains, think about it. The brains behind the Lua training mode is a Hugo main.
Yeah.
Think about this.
You know such Discord? I know they are very tech. Is there? Yeah, do you know of Discord? Hugo Discord?
Yeah, not off the top of my head, but once people listen to this podcast, I'm sure, perhaps people will maybe reach out to you. Who knows? But it's so like I know we didn't. It's we're kind of jumping, into different things. But why Hugo?
Because it's fun. I went through a lot of different characters.
Yeah.
I'm settled on Hugo right now, but I think I started as a Makoto player.
Uh-huh.
Then I played Ibuki, and finally I settled on Hugo. And I think you said that you were not a very lab heavy player, and I'm not either really. I just want things to work well so I can quickly go to what I need. And I think I like to play characters that do not have a lot of stuff. And when you play Hugo, there's not a lot of combos, or like the character is pretty straightforward. But then there's a lot of, setups and situations and when you use that move and everything.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
I like the simplicity of the character, I think, and I think I like characters that have like strong points and strong weaknesses, especially in Third Strike, because it allows you to engage with the game, like really about what the game systems are. Like with Hugo, like it's not a modern grappler. You do not have any moves that gets you in, basically. If you want to get in, you have to work for it.
Mm-hmm.
And for this, you need to engage with the game systems and the matchups. This is something that I find really interesting.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, it's, I mean, this is basically going to turn into a conversation about low tier characters. Because you are a Hugo main, I am a Necro main.
Yeah.
It seems like what you're talking about is sort of the challenge.
Yeah.
And, that's kind of what the Lua is all about. Yes, learning tool, helping us explore the game. But like you said, push our understanding of the game, challenge what we know about the game and how the game works.
Mm-hmm.
And the Lua, it's like, it's a challenge unto itself, right? Because now we have this tool, and, just for me personally speaking, now that I have the tool, now I want to, explore the mechanics of my character more. And now I have a way to do that. And so, thank you, Grouflon, for all your hard work, all your dedication. Before we sort of wrap this up, is there anyone in a particular or anything in particular you wanted to shout out? Maybe mention before we wrap up the podcast.
Basically, yeah. I mean, anyone in the Third Strike community, which I think this is a really awesome community, and especially people in the French community who welcomed me very warmly. And really, this is always a pleasure to meet new Third Strike people and to attend to events. And I'm so glad that people are still organizing tournaments and stuff around the game, or even podcasts like you. People who make this game still live on. It's still great. And I think, I'm kind of a new generation of players, even though I'm not that young. I'm 34. But feels like, as you said, there was this alignment of things at the start of the pandemic, where there was this pandemic, the new Fightcade version that came out, and my training mod that came out at the same point, which really made a new impulsion in the Third Strike community. But now at any time you hit Fightcade and there's minimum 500 players playing the game, which is crazy. So every person, everyone should play Third Strike and organize things and try to make the game live more. Yeah.
And I guess just, kind of maybe the last thing I wanted to say is, really the Lua is a celebration of the game. Because it does help us, it does help us really understand the game, on that level. And like you said, regardless of whether the devs, were conscious of what they were doing, that is something that I would definitely be interested in looking into, as far as, kind of having a conversation with the devs about some of the more technical aspects of developing Third Strike. What did they mean by trying to perfect the parry system? What exactly what they're trying to do? How were they? Those game design choices. That would be really interesting. And so we're going to go ahead and wrap it up there. But again, Grouflon, wanted to thank you again for coming on the podcast. Again, if you're interested in trying out the Lua training mode script, type in that link that you see on the bottom right-hand corner to the GitHub site for the Lua script. You can go ahead and just download that. Of course, you need Fight Cave as well. You'll have all those resources there to you. So thanks again for tuning in to the Mutant XPerience podcast, and I'll see you all next time.